everybody. Welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Lisa Kath. She received her PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Connecticut, is currently an associate professor at San Diego State University, and is the founder, creator of Psych memes, which we are very excited to get into. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, we are so excited. The famous IOSX memes account that I feel like every first year master student or undergrad getting into it has like come across. And it's like this like light at the end of the tunnel. And it's like IOSX memes, what is that? So we are very excited to talk to you about just science communication, how you started it all,
Awesome.
just your life in general.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I know both Brandon and I have like come across it. Brandon, any chance that you remember the first meme that you've seen?
I can't tell you the first one, but I remember one recently. It was the IO students or the IO professors that are teaching in a business school versus an IO program. That one was a recent one, but that one was really funny, and that one caught my eye pretty quick. It was with Lil Nas X.
Oh man, yeah, I triggered some people with that one.
Yeah, it's good content, anyways.
You know
Yeah.
that I you just said that actually just came across my mind, like triggering people with IO psych memes. Do you ever have to like navigate that, like talking to people about what you post and like ever handling conversations around that?
I think the probably where it comes up the most is when I talk about employment and getting a job in IO psychology. So, you know, IO psychology is one of those areas of psychology where you can get good employment. It's got good career prospects, but the job market has been so tough lately that more and more, if I'm posting memes that talk about this is a really great career option for people who are interested in psychology, I'll get folks that will either comment or direct message me and say, I've been looking for a job for 3 months, 6 months, a year. What do I do? And I have to figure out how to respond in a way that's supportive and helpful, also recognizing that I'm not a career counselor or a job placement person or anything like that. So that's probably the closest.
Well, that's like the center like of a meme. Like it has some like truth to it, but it's supposed to like ease people into the topic, which I think the
Yeah.
account does very well. But to
Thank
get to
you.
the actual beginning of the account, what led you to start this whole journey? Because it obviously has impacted so many people in IO psychology in a good way.
It's a really, to me, a weird story. I think if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be running a memes account that, had over 10,000 followers and that a lot of people knew about, I would be like, that's ridiculous. I am a middle aged suburban mom. There's no reason for me to be running a memes account. But my oldest kid was a senior in high school and started a Instagram account that was making memes about tech theater topics related to their theater program. And so I saw the memes. I thought they were funny. I thought they were cute. And I asked, are these really difficult to make? Because I don't know how to make memes. And so my oldest kid was like, oh, they're really easy. Do you want me to show you how? I said, sure. So then once I learned how, and I was just doing basic like iPhone markup memes, really, really easy stuff. Um, I said, I could make these about IO psychology. And I got an eye roll from my high school senior. Well, I mean, you could, I guess. So I did, and I showed them to my grad students. My grad students were like, "We really like these. We can make some as well. Like, you should start an account." So just on a whim, I started accounts with, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, I think were my first three, and posted them. And there was the most popular Instagram account in our field was at org psych, which is no longer active. Um, but they reposted my memes and encouraged people to follow me. I went from 25 followers to 250 followers in about a week. It was wild. And then from there, I was like, oh, I might be onto something. So that's how it got started, just kind of by luck.
You know, it's a good story too for students to hear because sometimes your greatest opportunities, and I know this isn't the only thing you do with your career, but like it's still something really cool that you can hang your hat on. Like with looking at the IO Psych memes account, I know Joe and I both have said many times, like, this has been really cool for us. It's a really cool way to kind of communicate IO Psych to people. Not many students really get the opportunity to really explain what they do, but when they
Hmm.
do, I feel like the IO Psych memes account helps with that, because it's really hard to like try and explain IO Psych to people. Hence this podcast, hence your memes account, and all the other podcasts out there. Like, how do you kind of like talk about IO psychology with like people who might not necessarily be in the field, and do you use your memes to help out with that, like really explaining the information?
So it's a two-part question. How do I talk to people about IO Psych who haven't heard about it? It's literally my job. I teach intro IO Psych, and I have been teaching this class since 2006, off and on, obviously. So I have had enormous amounts of practice translating the things that we know and boiling them down to essential chunks of information that I would like my students to know, not just for the test but also for the rest of their lives. I mean, teaching is kind of creepy in that you're hoping to like really get into somebody's head and stay there forever. Um, and so I really want it to be memorable. So I think that I tried to think about ways that I can communicate effectively and really concisely to make sure that I got in their heads and stayed there. So then when I started making memes, I found that it was pretty easy for me to make memes because I'd already worked on some of that condensing and some of that, what are the key sound bites here that I want people to remember. And then I have a goofy sense of humor anyway, so the memes were just sort of a perfect alignment. Do I use the memes to communicate with other people? Surprisingly, my lecture slides have very few memes. I don't use a ton of my memes in there. I I guess I feel a little awkward using them. I know other professors do. I've talked to some folks who are like, "Oh, I love your memes. I use them in my lectures all the time." I know people yeah, I know people who have used them in newsletters and things. I don't know why I feel weird about putting them on there. Like, "Oh, hey, look, I made this thing. Isn't it funny?" I don't it just feels weird. I don't know. I haven't been able to pull it off very smoothly. So every once in a while when one's just like right on the nose and I think it might help make a point, then I'll do it. Otherwise I don't so much. But I have heard of a lot of people say that it's useful to help their family and friends understand what it is that we do in a way that might be just a little more accessible than just talking about it with them.
Down the line, if I ever teach, I will 100% be using your memes
Same
in
here.
my slides. Because I truly believe, like when we're talking about science communication, that they do a great job of communicating different topics. Because I feel like we've all read, especially students have read articles before where you just see like that term, and you're like, I don't really know what that means. And then it just like
Hmm.
follows some statistics, and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna forget about it. But when you put it in like a funny picture, but well explained, it helped gets that like idea across. For like a quick snippet, I remember I did like a presentation. I was using like The Office, but I feel like other students have done that before
Hmm.
as like certain like scenes, and you're like, oh, this actually represents like this topic
Yeah.
in IO psychology. It makes sense. But I want to touch upon something that you talked about when you teach your intro to IO psych courses. Do you see your students coming in with any like prior knowledge in the field, or are you really teaching them from day one like the basics of biopsychology, and that's like the first time they've ever heard about it?
It's a mix, but I feel like and I don't know if this is true or not because I haven't like this isn't I'm not working from analytics here, but I feel like there are more students who are coming in knowing what the field is. And so I got to give a shout out to anybody who's teaching AP Psych who's covering this stuff. I think it can be skipped, and I think sometimes it is skipped or it's done like really really minimally. But I think more AP Psych folks are talking about IO Psych. And so I have met a number of students who have said, "Oh yeah, and I was kind of interested in IO Psych because I heard about it when I was in high school in my AP Psych class." And I said, I always tell them, go back and give that teacher a high five, man. This is serious. And I have made some memes, of course, my love language. I've made some memes about how the best AP Psych teachers will, cover IO Psych, make sure that they include it. I always include the hashtag AP Psych in my posts so that any AP Psych students who might be looking around might stumble across it as well, just to try to make sure that we get that early exposure. But for sure, there are folks that come in, they took the class because it fit their schedule nicely and fulfilled maybe some requirement, and they have no idea what they're getting into. So it's always a mix.
I feel like you're in a unique position because I feel like you're catching people at all different walks of life in their career. Specifically with the memes account, like you are targeting people who are working and they're getting the like actual application of what they've learned in grad school. You're teaching an intro IO psych course, and on top of that, all of the memes you have apply to people across a broad spectrum. To the point that Joe is kind of making there with like the students you're seeing and some of the trends you're seeing, like have you kind of seen that as you go to like events like PSYOP or just like in your program in general, like IO has kind of increased in popularity? Like I know you said that they might already know what it is, but have you seen like an increase in that popularity from it as well?
I think that it is becoming more popular. I know that at San Diego State, we've got a number of ways that students can get connected with IO psychology. They can do a minor in IO psychology if they're not a psych
Oh,
major. They
wow.
can get an emphasis in IO if they are a psych major. Even if you're not a degree seeking student, you can get a certificate in IO here. So we've got a really strong undergraduate presence, which kind of then, feeds itself because people are talking to other students. What are you taking? So I think, really, really locally we're seeing a lot of increased interest in IO psychology. And then I think nationally, where you see that reflected is in the increase in the number of graduate programs that are offering master's degrees in IO. So I think that that has to reflect some sort of demand or interest.
I feel like it's growing. Like, because I remember in my undergraduate, there was like no talk of biopsychology. And then the semester that I agreed to come to Hofstra actually came to my school and like did a presentation. I was like, you guys couldn't do this like a year ago before, like, just so like I would have like known, reduced some of my anxiety. But I see it at like other schools too. And I'm like, oh, it really is a growing field.
Yeah.
Um, because I think like we heard that like route to like from clinical and you're like, oh, I don't really want to do clinical, and then they find that
Right.
IO psychology. It actually makes me think like how many people in clinical psychology end up like just doing some other type of psychology, and if they'd known about IO psych, they would have done it.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm friends with somebody who is a biology professor, and I worked with him. He does work in administration now at the university. And when I see him, he always reminds me, he says, ever since I've met you, I've thought, I'm not going to go back and do a second PhD, but if I had it to do over again, I'd get my PhD in IO psychology.
Oh, it's great.
And I just think,
That's
wow, that's
awesome.
really cool. So I do think that there are a lot of people out there who, like me, are surprised to find out that this field exists and are delighted to know that there's like a scientific approach to managing people. It's just really appealing, I think, to a lot of folks.
Yeah, I know it's like an altruistic field for sure, and it draws a lot of people in. I feel like Joe and I have shared our personal anecdotes of how we kind of like fell into IO psychology. Like, is that kind of similar to what Joe said with that clinical route? Like, what was your route for IO psychology? Like, how did you find your way in?
My route is the worst possible route, so please, nobody try this. I got my undergraduate degree in organic chemistry. And I was an organic chemist for 6 or so, I don't know, years, I forget how many, a number of years, working at two different companies. Um, and I knew that I didn't want to stay in those roles, but I didn't know what to do. I kept thinking maybe an MBA, but it wasn't, there was something about it that just, I grew up in Texas, so there was just a hitch in my giddy up with regards to getting an MBA. There was something about it that wasn't right for me. So I was exploring other things. I actually did career counseling, and there that process was really interesting. They did a lot of assessment, and they don't just say, okay, so your career match is this, and then you're off and running. They give you a lot of options, and a lot of them are terrible. Like they said, I'd be a great military officer. Incorrect. I do not take orders well. That would be awful. But IO psychology was one of the ones that came up. My first response when she mentioned it, the counseling psychologist, I said, "Oh, absolutely not. I don't want to counsel people." And she said, "That's not what they do," and encouraged me to look into it. And so I looked into it, and the more I looked into it, and the more I looked into an MBA, the more I realized that IO psychology focused on only the parts of the MBA that I would be interested in anyway, and it was more scientific. And I was just like, this is it. I think this is the thing.
No, it's a great story. I'm wondering if there were any like transferable skills that you saw from chemistry to IO, because I feel like I know it's like the gap is so big. Like sometimes you see people go from like an MBA to IO, and there's like more skills there. Maybe like analytical knowledge, or I mean, I don't know much about chemistry in general, but like, do
Yeah.
you see any of those crossover?
I mean, I guess I would say that I feel like my work experience was really helpful. Um, so I don't know that it's specifically the chemistry. I mean, God, I took awful classes. I took classes in like physics and differential equations. I mean, so the matrix algebra was helpful when I took testing and measurement. I mean, because I took a testing and measurement that was old school, and we had to do factor analysis by hand, and so that wasn't upsetting to me at all. That was easy. It was more like the experience of it that was helpful than the content of it. Like knowing
Okay,
the shape of a p orbital is super not helpful, as an IO psychologist. But having had to experience two really different work cultures, I worked for a small startup company, Gilead Sciences, which is no longer a small startup company, and then I worked for a really big company, Pfizer. Um, and so both of those places had really palpably different workplace cultures. That's super interesting and it is very helpful. So when I went into grad school, it was awesome to be able to refer back to those experiences and ground the stuff that I was learning in those experiences that I had as an employee.
That's a really interesting perspective, and it kind of touches on a topic we've had on here a lot, just like thinking about how you can apply IO psych because it doesn't always look the way you think. And
Yeah.
I think just looking at that, where you just had two different experiences doing organic chemistry, you're still able to find a way to relate the IO psych. And I think that's the cool part is that it exists everywhere. You just got to find it.
Mhm.
And I want to kind of transition us back to your memes account really quick because I had a question about it in terms of one. Joe and I are just kind of starstruck. We got you on here. We're so happy. It's been we. I remember seeing your IO Psych memes account right when I got into grad school, and I know that it was something that actually helped not only learn but communicate, like I said earlier on. So Joe and I definitely wanted to give you a thank you for helping us and other students and just other IOs out there be able to communicate that. But I
Oh,
wanted to
sweet to
ask
hear.
you a question. There was a question in there, I promise. I wanted to ask you a question about like how those transferable skills. You're now talking about making an iOS like memes account and being a teacher. Do you think that when you were a professor, the iOS like memes account kind of helped you like learn how to teach the material or like objectively like communicate it in a way that was helpful for students? Like, what did you see that transfer of like creating those memes and you're being a professor at a large university?
It's been interesting because I created the count with no expectations, except that I honestly thought that I would do it for maybe 2 or 3 months and then quit. Just like it'd just be a little thing that I did for a while and haha. Remember that time that I made memes? Um, and it took off. And so I've had an opportunity then to reflect on why I'm still doing this, why it's still fun, which I think kind of answers your question. But if when I'm done it doesn't, then just go ahead and ask me again. Um, but so one of the things that I think is fun is I really do love teaching. And I feel like the memes are great ways to connect with people, and it's a way to expand my audience. So I only have, X number of students enrolled in my classes. And at San Diego State, the classes are large. Like I've taught, you know, I think my biggest IO class, intro IO class, was 240. But right now, like this semester, I've got like 119, I think, students in my class. So, but
Wow.
that's a limited number of people that I am reaching. It's fun to be able to reach more people and people who are not psychology students. I think one of my Twitter followers is a mayor in Nebraska. I don't know. I hope he's doing okay. Like I don't know how he found the account. I don't know what's going on, but that's really cool is to be able to expand that reach because I really do wish that everybody knew some basics about IO psychology. So that's one thing that's really satisfying to me. The other thing that's really satisfying, and I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit, is that the account seems to have created an online community for IO psychologists. There's a sense of connection there. And so you realize when you're facing these issues or experiencing these things, You're not alone. Even if you're the only IO psychologist in your company, you're not alone. Even if you're one of 10 grad students in a program, you're not alone. But there are this huge group of people in all different types of positions who are thinking the same things, experiencing the same things, delighted by the same things, frustrated by the same things. That sense of community, I think, is really, really neat. So, those are the things that have really kept me motivated and connected to the account is just that extra outreach, the extra audience, and for informational purposes, and then also that sense of community.
Whenever someone asks me like what's one of the best things about IO psychology, I always start with like the tight knit community that it
Yeah.
has. Like even alumni have told us as students, they're like, stay together with your cohort and the people you graduate in on other cohorts at different schools because those are the people that you're going to be talking with about different research articles, job postings. Like, oh, this person works here and they're doing IO psych work. It's I mean, I can't speak for other majors in different schools, but I feel like IO psychology is definitely like one of those best communities that you just like feel connected with.
Yeah,
But it
I
was a good
totally agree.
question that Brandon asked. I wanted to ask about your pathway to teaching. Did your previous experience have any what's the word I'm looking for? I do this every podcast. I always forget the word. Did your previous experience have any like direction into your like, oh, since I worked at these big companies, I'd rather not go the corporate route again. I'd rather do that teaching way.
Mm,
Or were you just always like ready to teach and you're like, this is what I want to do?
that's an interesting question, and the answer is neither of those things.
Ooh.
So, yeah, I know it's like a secret third thing. Are you ready? Um, the I originally planned to get my PhD in IO psychology so that I could argue with anyone, including scientists and engineers. So I had worked with a bunch of scientists, and I know engineers are similarly skeptical about things. They need to know the evidence and the data. Um, and I saw that HR initiatives often didn't account for scientists and engineers being a different type of people. Like they're just, we're more skeptical. We want to know what's underneath the hood. We're not going to buy the car just by how it looks on the outside. And so I thought that I could be a more effective HR professional in a research and development environment if I had a PhD and I really understood what was going on. So that was my motivation to go get a PhD in IO psychology, and my plan was to go applied. And then I got to grad school and they assigned me teaching and made me do research. And it turns out I like both of those things quite a bit. So I think that I could be happy in an applied career. I really like solving problems. I'm a really strongly applied researcher. But I think that the reason that I ended up going into academia is that I really fell in love with teaching and research after I started grad school.
It's so cool to hear like these stories, whether it's how you founded the account or how you fell into IO Psych or how you became a professor. Like I think they're good anecdotes for students out there too, to like understand that you don't have to have all these things figured out. Sometimes they just kind of happen and you figure it out along the way. One question that comes to my mind about just like teaching and getting that experience and then becoming a professor and working your way up, like you were talking about how you're an applied researcher. What kind of research do you look into?
Right now, I was going to say focused on, obsessed with experiences of pediatric healthcare workers. So I got connected with a group that is looking at particularly patient safety, but they also have started to focus on employee safety, which is one of my areas of research. And healthcare workers get injured at a rate that's higher than construction workers. So their jobs are dangerous, and they were tackling this group is like this consortium of children's hospitals. It's called the Solutions for Patient Safety if people want to google it and nerd out a little bit. um, and it's this alliance of children's hospitals. Their goal was to collaborate together and to work to solve problems for patient and now employee safety, and to share their data in doing so, so that they would not compete on things that mattered for patient or employee safety. And so I was their embedded researcher from 2017 and had a chance to listen to them talk about these issues. They had three areas. One was called overexertion, where people were getting injured moving patients or lifting heavy bags of linen or things like that. The second area was slips, trips, and falls. And then the third area was patient behavioral events or really patient aggression. I assumed that I would focus on overexertion because I had already done a little bit of work in that area. But as I listened to them, where the need was the greatest was in patient behavioral events or patient aggression. And so, as it turns out, there were a lot of experiences where patients would be aggressive towards the healthcare workers. Sometimes they were scared, sometimes they were having a psychosis episode. And so these injuries could come from kids that were pretty. I mean, if you think about a 17-year-old, some of them are really big and really strong. So these experiences could be really scary and really upsetting. And so they said, this is the area where we know the least. We would love for you to do research in this area. So I pivoted because I like to really listen to the communities that I'm doing research with and focus my research on their areas of greatest need. And then that opens up areas for me to learn more so I can be helpful.
Just to make sure I understand that the third point, the one that you're now currently researching, the aggressive behavior, is it resulting in like physical harm, or does it also cover like mental stress and like fatigue? Is that well? Is it like all encompassed?
It's a really good question. Obviously, both of those things happen to healthcare workers, and they're both really serious. This particular area is focused on physical aggression from a patient and then sometimes from their families, yikes, towards the healthcare worker. And so they're particularly looking at workers' comp claims, days away, restricted and transferred, total recordable incident rates, sort of safety measures like that. And so they really are more focused on the physical things. Psychological things may come into play if that results in workers' comp claims, but it's much more common that it would be the physical things that we're focusing on.
Makes sense. I know a couple of my friends who work in like the healthcare industry,
Mhm.
and like until I feel like you hear about it, you don't think of it as like a dangerous, or I didn't think of it as like a
Right.
dangerous place. But then they tell me some of the stories, and I'm like, oh my god, that's actually pretty scary. Like
It's
you got to be on your toes.
You really do. It's crazy. And for me, I think I maybe had some sense. I'd worked with nurses before. I've done research on nurses for many, many years now. So I knew that it could be a dangerous job, but I thought children's hospitals, I mean, when you see the pictures of, patients in children's hospitals, they're oftentimes tiny. They look very weak and frail and fragile, and so you're not thinking that they're going to inflict injury, but you're not. It took me a while to really understand that the patients that they are helping with come in all different shapes and sizes, and some of them can be quite strong. Even young small kids can inflict quite a bit of damage if they're really severely dysregulated, um, and get something sharp in their hands. It can be pretty dangerous. But so some of the stories that I've heard are really sobering. It's a really serious issue. And so for me, I've been really, really interested in and pleased with being able to think about how I can point my research skills and my psychology knowledge towards supporting those workers doing work that I find super impressive and really important.
That's all really interesting. And I have one more follow up question for this. I know we didn't plan on talking about it, but it's just really interesting. Um,
Putting you on the spot.
yeah. Were there any like direct outcomes that you've found so far from your research, like for you guys moving forward, like any actual actionable items that have come from your research?
Yeah, so our first research study is wrapped up. I'm slowly working on a manuscript, but it is okay. I'm not going to talk about that part of it. But the analyses are done, and the results showed that when people experience these patient behavioral events, um, they experience psychological harm, reduced work attitudes, increased stress, increased burnout, increased intentions to quit, kind of the things that you would expect. But we found that this scaled with the frequency of the events. So even like low level frequent events can cause an increase in these negative outcomes. And we found support for the idea that witnessing or hearing about the events also has an effect on these outcomes. So you don't have to be the target of these events. It can just be having seen it or having heard about it that can also cause these, detrimental psychological effects. So, talking about that and helping administrators understand that there are ripple effects from each of these events, to me, underscores the importance of trying to prevent them. And so that encourages them, hopefully, to put resources behind all the different ways that they might try to prevent these events from happening in the first place. And we know that primary interventions are the best kinds of interventions. But my next research project is really focusing on a secondary intervention, which is if something happens, how do we intervene to mitigate harm? And so that's the other thing that I'm really interested in is peer support programs, and how can we equip peers to be able to be really supportive and not just help, not drag people into some sort of rumination about the event. And so we're exploring that space, and that's been really interesting too.
I'm glad to see more IO in the healthcare industry. I
Oh
feel
my
like it's kind of like a
gosh.
growing field. We have a
Ugh.
couple students doing it in our cohort, and I feel like I've heard of other people doing research, and it makes sense. Like as you were saying, like there's a lot of culture things going on, and certain org health questions that IO psychology can help with.
Yeah,
Uh, but unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world
I
to
know.
discuss it. Maybe a part two one day. But we would
Yeah.
like to end off with our usual question. Do you have any advice for IO students, prospective IO students looking to get the most out of the field?
I think that maybe the thing that has helped me the most, gosh, there's kind of two things that are popping into my mind. One is, while you're in grad school, don't forget to pause and marvel at the delight of being a grad student. Yes, it is difficult. Yes, it is a grind. Yes, you are being pushed. Also, what a lovely, magical time to expand your knowledge, expand your horizons, be with other people who are interested in the things that you're interested in. It's really awesome. So don't forget to stop and take that perspective. So that's one thing. Am I only allowed one, or can I have a second one?
You have as many
It's
as you
okay.
want.
We could do it too.
All right, thanks. You guys are so generous. Um, so I think then the other thing is to pause every once in a while and just check your compass. So for me, throughout my life and my career, I'm doing the thing. I pause, I look up, and I think, am I swimming in the direction that I want to be swimming in? And I think that's what led me to find psychology and switch. I think it's what has led me to switch or refine my focus in terms of what it is that I'm doing research on, how I'm living my life, how I'm managing my career. So I think I would just encourage people to not get caught up in the day to day all the time, but to pause, pull your head up out of the water, look around, make sure you're swimming in the direction you want to swim.
I think that's great advice. We kind of spoke about it on the podcast today, just kind of about how you've been falling into positions or learning about these things as they go, but just because you fall into them, you still were able to like self reflect and course correct when needed. And I
Hmm.
think that's an important call out because as students are going, I think Joe and I have both been victim to this where we get in the day to day grind of grad school and
Yeah,
you forget sometimes that like this is going to be over soon. I mean, for Joe and I, it's over in a couple weeks,
it's
so
crazy.
it's one of those things that the time really flies. And
Yeah,
if you don't take a second, like you posted a meme. I can't remember what the content was, but I know it was the dog in the burning room, uh, sitting in the chair. And I think everybody knows that meme. And I like
yeah,
sometimes that's what grad school can feel like. Just with there's so many things going
sure.
on. And how you're trying to like strengthen your skills for the working world. So just being able to take a second and not only marvel at what you're doing, but make sure you're doing it in the right direction too. I think those work hand in hand together, Lisa, and I think that's absolutely great advice for students to hear.
Great.
Well, thank you, Lisa, so much for coming on and talking to us about your experience, the meme account, and just your overall advice. It was a really fun time. I'm very excited for people to hear about this, and I'm pretty sure other people are excited once they see that link pop up.
Before we go though, we have to ask you what your favorite meme is that you
Oh
posted.
yes.
Oh my gosh, like picking my favorite child. What the heck? That's ridiculous. I have no idea. I have the memory of a goldfish. Honestly, sometimes I look back at my memes, the old ones, because I'll do reruns, because I'm not always cranking out new content these days. Um, and I'll be like, oh man, I had forgotten about that meme. That's a great one. I don't know what my favorite one is. I do really like ones that focus people's attention on the need for systematic intervention for stress relief as opposed to individual intervention for stress relief. So, if we're talking about trying to prevent burnout or trying to help manage workplace stress, yeah, I'm not saying that mindfulness is bad. I'm not saying that resilience training is bad. I'm not saying that yoga classes are bad. I'm just saying like we also need to really be looking at the systems level. So anytime I can hit that message, I will hit that message. And I've hit it a few times and I will hit it a few more because I think it's really, really important. So that's one of my soapbox issues.
I'm gonna go searching through it now and try to
Yeah.
find that exact
I know
one.
I should have like a whole little packet of them so I can just send them to people when they
Foldered
need them.
out.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, thank you, Lisa, for joining us. It's going to be a great episode for people to hear.
Well, I really appreciate you guys having me. It's been a lot of fun. So I'm happy to come back anytime. Just let me know.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we're excited for that. Definitely. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Such a fun episode, especially to meet the person behind the IO Psych memes account. Lisa was so great. I love that we got to talk about her account, how she built it, and just some of the information that she puts in there, but also like hear more about her and like what she does in IO. I think it's cool to hear that she's more than just the IO Psych memes person. Like she's doing some really cool research and is a great professor too.
No, 100%. I love. I mean, of course, we loved hearing about the memes account. Everyone does, but especially her research that I wish we could have gone into a bit more was super interesting. Like in the healthcare industry, we hear about it every once in a while, but it's cool that it's like a growing field in IO, and to hear her part in it was even cooler. So hopefully, maybe we'll get like a part two or something like that with her on explaining it a little bit more in depth.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I want to say it again here too. We definitely want to thank her for all she does for the IO community. She's really built like a following, but also just like a resource for people. Sometimes it can be lonely out there trying to be the one IO in a company or doing an online IO program or anything along those lines. So, like for her to build that sense of community in IO, I think it's really great for students and like professionals out there to have.
Yeah, but thank you everybody for listening, especially for this episode. Hopefully, you guys really liked it, and we will catch you next week.